welcome to the Non-Diet Yogi Podcast. Each month, I invite you to dive deep with me to explore and dismantle the world of big wellness, where spirituality and wellness, diet culture, white supremacy, and toxic female entrepreneurship collide in a dizzying spectacle of goji berries and designer mala beads. This podcast is for you if you love yoga, but don't always love yoga culture, wish to form a deeper connection with your body and with the natural world around you, minus the wellness wankery, and you are tired of the classism, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, fat phobia, and other threads of white supremacy woven throughout the yoga, wellness, spirituality industrial complex, aka Big Wellness. I'm your host, Casey Conroy, non-diet dietitian, naturopath in training, and yoga teacher. And this month, I want to speak about a phenomenon I've noticed for quite some time now, but that has spiked sharply with the current spotlight on Black and Indigenous people of colour and the current protests happening in multiple parts of the world. And that is performative activism in yoga social media. So I want to explore this phenomenon and then take a deeper dive into where it might be coming from. Hint, we're going to talk about white supremacy in yoga. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. In contemporary yoga classes everywhere, teachers and students recite this popular Sanskrit chant. It roughly translates to, "May all beings everywhere be happy and free." We can assume that all beings includes trans folk, disabled folks, larger bodied folks, and Black and Indigenous people of colour, also known as BIPOC. And yet, woven into the cultural fabric of the rapidly expanding territory where yoga, wellness, and spirituality collide, lies a pretty long history of ignoring privilege and sidestepping conversations about intersectional systems of oppression. And as I mentioned just before, in particular, I've noticed this uptick of Black Lives Matter meme reposts by rising spiritual and wellness influencers. And on reading the captions or lack thereof that accompany many of these posts, what becomes apparent to me, at least, is a distinct failure by the influencer to grasp the gravitas behind the actual meaning of the original posts, and sometimes a tangible lack of any actual fucks being given. And this is a phenomenon that I initially described as performative activism, but have since heard other people describing it as. So I didn't make that term up. And if you just take a look at the social media feeds of many aspiring wellness influencers or owners of large yoga studios, usually white, usually affluent women, who post usually the odd pro-diversity or Black Lives Matter meme. Just take a look at the social media feeds of some of these folks. And in stark contrast to the important message of bringing light to police brutality against BIPOC or tackling the general issue of underrepresentation of coloured folks in yoga and wellness spaces, you may notice, as I have, that these feeds are filled, jam-packed even, with white, thin, able-bodied, cis-het women laughing whilst drinking green juices, or more often, striking advanced yoga poses on beaches and on cliff edges and stuff like that. And, you know, there might be the odd disingenuous nod to racial injustice, examples of which I will give shortly. You know, sprinkled really quite sparingly for some of these influences, in between the dazzling white smiles, the sponsored posts, the stylized asana, lies this occasional post alluding to inclusivity. And it's really, really odd. It's the same old wellness culture, recycled material usually, but now with some disingenuous concern for racial injustice sprinkled on top as a kind of a popularity boosting afterthought, it feels like. So in a sea of white privilege float lonely memes stating things like no one is superior, accompanied by usually a low commitment empty caption like no words needed. And I have actual examples of these kinds of memes that I am thinking of putting together in an online article. So if you want to actually have a look at some of these examples, you will be able to do that. I'll put a link in the show notes. You know, I'm just looking through a couple of ones that I've taken screenshots of at the moment, and you know, there's this other one, a beautiful image of a black looks like woman and a white woman arching their backs in a kind of yoga pose back to back with the single word listening written above them. And this wellness influencer has, as the caption, posted a single emoji. And that's despite other more sales promoting posts in their sea of white yoga asana. Despite these other posts having much longer, clearly well thought out captions. So I guess what I'm trying to say is white yoga influencers. A lot of your anti-racism posts feel fake. And, you know, I know that the typical rising yoga influencer, wellness person posting Black Lives Matter memes is probably a caring person, a person who wishes to do no harm, who wishes to abide by the yogic principle of ahimsa. And yet, more often than not, far more often than not, unfortunately, the anti-racism material these individuals post, or far more commonly repost, they don't actually go to the arse of creating these posts, it just feels utterly fake. And so far I've commented on several of these posts asking about the influencers' personal views on these issues, or, you know, asking what they're actually doing to dismantle these constructs within their business. And I've waited for their responses, and I have received exactly 0 to date. Just a vacuum of silence. And this is on a public feed with my comment showing up in a public comment section, in this case on Instagram. It's just like, whoa, where's the accountability? And the weird thing is there's no one else asking the same questions, which I find quite creepy. It's as if the yoga bubble is a sacred white space of good vibes only, where meaningfully confronting issues that challenge the status quo are just not really permitted to happen. And I don't know, I guess it's maybe too unpalatable, too uncomfortable a subject to bring into a professionally styled yoga feed crammed with natarajasanas and succulents and shit. You know, people, I suppose, go to yoga to feel good, right? I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. You know, maybe there's no room for all that political stuff. Maybe that would lower the vibration in our yoga tribe too much. Okay. Stepping out of my role as one of these influencers. You know, by the way, unless you are yourself a person of Indigenous lineage, please stop using the word tribe. It is just, it sounds dodgy as fuck. Okay, so, you know, what do I want to see? And I know other people feel the same way about this. I've had conversations with other practitioners, other teachers in the yoga wellness world who feel the same way. And I and other people I've spoken to really feel like, if we as yoga wellness influencers are going to post these memes, then we really need to not just post these memes. So I'm just looking at another one right now, the one that has a little, stylish picture and the words say "no one is superior" in the picture. And then the caption written by the poster says, "no words needed." That's it. And I really think that if we are going to post this kind of stuff, then words are absolutely needed. If we truly care about the issue of racism, I want to see large yoga studios run by white folks using their platforms to amplify the voices of BIPOC. I want to hear rising wellness influencers sharing their personal thoughts on systemic racism and privilege. I want to know how spiritual folks in position of power who are posting this stuff are working to decenter themselves and dismantle white supremacy, both within and beyond, ideally, their businesses. But, one or the other of those would be a start. So, okay, before I go further, I just want to give a little bit of background on my experience with racism, basically. So I'm biracial. My mother is Chinese. My father is white. He's Australian. And I have experienced just discrimination based on what I look like, including but not limited to physical assault and verbal slurs. And this happened, I've got to say, for me, this happened more in my childhood, growing up in a rural, really just fucking redneck area where racism was rampant. There were many amazing things about growing up in the little town of Ingham. Hey, everyone from Ingham. You know what I mean. Growing up in that area, it was amazing for the natural beauty of that place, but racism was seriously an issue. Once I left home and moved to more racially diverse capital cities in Australia, my experiences improved markedly. So I do have an idea of what it's like to be targeted because of the colour of my skin and my facial features, even as a biracial person, not a fully coloured person, or, I guess you could say. And I also know that what I've been through is just like a drop in the ocean. It's a tiny sliver of what Black and Indigenous people of colour go through every day. I'm the first to say I'm not an expert in anti-racism, and I too have felt confused and torn about what I should do to help, how to be better. And I've really taken time to think about this. So I'm going to describe this process that I've ended up undertaking. And please note that I'm not saying that this is the way to go about it and that everyone should do what I've done. But I just want to put this out there because I think a little transparency is warranted here, given that I am critiquing the steps, or lack thereof, taken by many of my big wellness counterparts. So here we go. Over the last few months, I have intentionally resisted the temptation to post Black Lives Matter stuff with the hashtag Black Lives Matter as a way of reassuring everyone that I'm strongly supportive of BIPOC and oppose the systemic oppression they face, which of course I am and do. There have been times when I've really felt tempted and felt like posting a black square would help me feel like I've met the quota required for appearing to give a shit, and I vehemently do give a shit. And I have intentionally not posted memes stating no one is superior, we are all one, or the particularly egregious I don't see colour with a single little, love heart emoji or similarly brief caption after it. And why? Why have I not done this? Personally, it's because as a yoga teacher and I don't know, possible wellness influencer, I don't want to gift myself with that kind of flattery, but maybe I do have some of that. I'm just extremely wary of falling into the camp of yoga, spirituality, wellness people who post disingenuous pro-inclusivity memes yet have not actually done the work. And I'll talk about what that work implies soon. I find that people who post these memes could be doing so for a number of reasons. It could be out of a desire to connect to oppressed folks. It could just be to alleviate their own discomfort. It could be a number of other reasons, but the intention is not actually the most important thing here. When people post these memes thoughtlessly without actually doing deeper work, in themselves, they can and often do, especially if you're posting fucking I don't see colour or, any of those other stupid memes or captions, you are negating the lived experiences of folks of colour who don't have the luxury of pretending that colour doesn't matter. I was listening to a podcast by the amazing Diane Bondi, black yoga teacher, and she mentioned that, it was a conversation maybe she heard or she read somewhere else, but someone explained that as a person of colour, when they hear a white person tell them, oh, I don't see colour, what that translates to is, I don't see you. So, for people of colour, for BIPOC people particularly, colour affects everything. So for you to say, I don't see colour is extremely dismissive of their lived experience. I've also sat with this unsettling feeling, this kind of, part of me that cares more about what people think of me than about doing my own internal work, dismantling white supremacy and all the ways that I'm that I am complicit rather. That has been uncomfortable. So instead of reactionary posting, I decided to give myself time to get working. Again, this is just what I've done personally. Not saying I'm the best because I've done this, but this is just what's felt right for me to do. I just don't want to post a meme with a half-assed caption as a way to remain socially acceptable and morally palatable. That doesn't seem right to me. I want to be accountable to anyone who wants to know more about what I'm actually doing or what I've actually done to dismantle white supremacy in my business and in my personal life. So what does that look like? What has unpacking the ways that systemic racism colours the way I see the world look like? For me personally, it's been donating, although this alone is definitely not enough. For the most part, it's been educating myself and trying to figure out what I can do beyond just posting warm, fuzzy memes. I've been having some really tough conversations with close family, who are openly racist, who are openly against the protests. And they have been so painful. Some of these conversations, they've been so fucking uncomfortable, so viscerally gross to have some of these conversations. I've got a long way to go, but I've started doing this and it has had an impact on some of my relationships with those family members, and that's been really hard. And an additional impetus for me to do this work is the fact that diet culture, of course, which I work so hard to dismantle and help folks heal from in my nutrition counselling and disordered eating work, diet culture is rooted in racism. Racism is not only a social justice issue, but a public health issue. We really can't talk about diet culture, improving body image, intuitive eating, or even have very basic discussions about nutrition and health without understanding that all of these things stem from and have roots in the oppression of some bodies, historically black bodies. Again, I'm no anti-racism expert, so if you are interested in learning more about this, I highly recommend reading Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings and Skill in Action by Michelle Cassandra Johnson. And if you can afford to, buy their courses, support their work. Okay, so back to this performative activism phenomenon. Let's dissect this and let's dive a little bit deeper now. I want to start with this. Not all wellness influencers are completely disingenuous in their public discourse on anti-racism. Of course not. That's not what I'm saying here. I don't want to paint all wellness people with the same brush. Of course, I'm in amongst this crowd. As with everything, there is a spectrum, it seems. So over the past few months, I've been watching, and it seems like there have arisen a couple of main categories of influencer, big wellness influencer, who posts pro-inclusivity, anti-racism, Black Lives Matter kind of material. There are those who are actually trying to do better, however imperfectly, and there are those who don't really give a shit but want to look like they do. And then there's this third category of spirituality, wellness, yoga influencers who actively promote racist and white supremacist ideals under the guise of high spirituality. So this is the all lives matter people, who more often than not seem to be caught up in the, conspiracy theory stuff and the QAnon stuff as well. These all lives matter people who covertly and sometimes overtly dismiss the struggles long endured by BIPOC. But that's a whole other kettle of fish I will not go into today. My nervous system can only handle so much. And even just recording this, I'm shaking. My nervous system is already kind of amped up, my systemic nervous system. But, I think this shit has to be said. So I just want to clarify one more thing before I go further. And that is, am I saying that every yoga influencer should incessantly post about social justice issues? No, they should not. And I'm not saying that. If all you want to do is post instructional yoga videos, that is cool by me. Go for it. Maybe you don't know what to say, or you are still trying to figure out how to say it. When it comes to anti-racism, maybe you're doing more research, as I have over the past few months, or you're busy dismantling your own internal biases, in which case, good on you. That's awesome. Maybe you prefer to keep anything aside from your niche material on your personal platforms or not on social media at all for whatever reason. Maybe you're scared of getting it wrong. I get it. It's okay. But, I try not to say but I'm saying but. But if we post multiple anti-racism or Black Lives Matter memes, all with half-assed captions, I think our followers deserve to know what our personal views on systemic racism and privilege are, and what we are doing to uplift BIPOC, given we seem to want our audience to believe we care about this issue. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't garner the kudos for being racially sensitive and radically inclusive without any real proof that you indeed are. Leverage people. We need to leverage our privilege, whatever privileges we do have, to center marginalized folks, and decenter ourselves, and not pay lip service to the hot topic of the times while staying well and truly in the spotlight. So, Some I can, again, I'm just playing devil's advocate. Some would argue that in sharing such posts, we actually ought to commend wellness influencers for their sensitivity to, for their concern for social justice issues. Yeah, cool, sure. There are many wellness influencers out there who are trying to do better. So I'm speaking to that first kind of group of influencers that I've seen. And that is awesome. And remember, we're striving for integrity, not perfection here. Perfection is also a characteristic of white supremacy culture. We all make mistakes. I certainly do. I make mistakes all the time. I was recently pulled up by a non-binary student in a yoga class for having only 2 options for gender on my new yoga student sign-up form, male or female. I felt so silly. And after dealing with my own feelings of resistance and then embarrassment, I felt really thankful for the correction, and I've since changed my forms to be much more inclusive. When we know better, we do better. And I know that there are yoga people who, like me, are trying to do better, albeit clumsily, however imperfectly that is. We are trying. And there are posts where, you've got white, usually wellness influencers and yoga teachers trying to do better by actively asking Black and Indigenous people of colour to reach out to them and to instruct them on how to be better. Look, I can see they're trying to do better, and I respect that. And asking Indigenous and people of colour to educate you on what you should do to do better is perpetuating the expectation of emotional and intellectual labour by BIPOC. Do not ask BIPOC what books you need to read, what organisations you need to support, or who to follow. Coloured folks should not have to do more work here. It is not their job to educate you. That is up to you. Deal with your internalized racism, process it, digest it, and if it is safe for you to do so, speak up when family members, friends, and colleagues say racist shit, okay? I think this is getting closer to the real work here. No donation can ever really match our willingness to get uncomfortable as fuck and challenge long-held beliefs that keep this shit, that keep systemic racism in place. So some influencers are genuinely trying to do better, even if they're asking BIPOC to show them how to do that. And yeah, there is this sense of feigned concern for social justice in the wellness world, this phenomenon that I'm speaking to. And you can almost feel the obligatoriness behind the pro-inclusivity, Black Lives Matter, etc. memes posted by this group of rising wellness influencer. So this is the second group that I spoke about. For these folks, it's a move, posting this material is a move to remain socially acceptable, morally palatable, all that stuff, rather than an act of anti-racism. It's a keeping up with the Joneses maneuver rather than a reflection of any real concern or desire to dismantle the rampant white supremacy and all that goes with that, racism, capitalism, sexism, fat phobia, transphobia, ableism, anti-feminism, all of that. And, I guess to some point this is the nature of the beast. Big wellness is an industry that sells the concept of the highly spiritual, highly well individual by ignoring the far more impactful social determinants of health that exist outside of diet and exercise. So I'm talking poverty, violence, education, stigma, social exclusion, accessibility, environment, genetics, all of these things that of course intersect with things like racism and race. So in complete opposition to the loka samasta sentiment, the distinct lack of happiness and freedom that many marginalized groups in our society are experiencing right now is pretty much ignored by this type of influencer in lieu of product positioning, incessant self-promotion, and upholding the spiritual, successful, sexy woman ideal, of which I wrote extensively about a couple of years ago in an article of the same name. I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. In many wellness influencers' feeds, the posting of memes conveying one's own quotes. Don't you just hate that when someone fucking repost their own quote, which may or may not actually be an original concept? In many of these folks' feeds, those kinds of posts easily outnumber the posts bringing awareness to social justice issues. And in others, another little thing I've noticed within this phenomena, there's this effort to appear racially sensitive that is made in a way that simultaneously reveals a gross black hole in awareness around issues of race, pun unintended. So take, for example, this post. Now, I think I will put these posts together in an article and put them on my website so that you can look at these posts yourself and examine and process them yourself. But there is this post I'm looking at right now that is posted by a wellness influencer where we've got a bunch of pictures of white women practicing yoga on beaches and in pristine yoga studios, and then like a little lost at sea kind of boy. We've got a post that was made on the 26th of January this year, which is Australia Day in Australia. Plenty of controversial context there to dive into, but I'm going to stay on track. So they've posted a picture of the Indigenous Australian flag as a backdrop for a picture of Australia, the actual map of Australia, with a little picture of, I guess, an Indigenous person with a spear in their hand hunting kangaroos. And, okay, so you've got that post there, and in the content, and so the caption reads, let's just scroll down, the caption reads, "Respect to the traditional customs of this land. Happy Australia Day." And then it goes on to say, "For your information, we are open, blah, 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 blah." So let's look at this post a bit more closely. In the context of a homogenous feed, which this is, lacking in diversity, grossly misstating respect to the traditional customs of this land when the word custodians is the actual appropriate term, really amplifies the eerie feeling one already has that this wellness influencer is seriously not only lacking in understanding of issues of race, but maybe lacking in genuine concern about this stuff. So just to fill you in, especially if you are not living in Australia or are Australian, some of you may have heard people paying their respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the traditional custodians and owners of the land before a meeting or event or something like that. So no, it's respect to the traditional custodians. It's the humans, not just the customs, that are to be paid respect here. So I'm going to quote the words of someone who has far more expertise in this field than I do, Georgia May Kapochi Hunter. She is a Wurundjeri and Nurai Ilamwarang woman. My apologies if I butchered any of those names. Who wrote an article I'll link to in the show notes again. And she says this about giving an acknowledgement of country, which is what it appears this wellness influencer was trying to do, albeit in a really offhand, unthoughtful way. So Georgia May Kapochi Hunter says this: "Giving an acknowledgement of country doesn't truly mean much unless you're actively assisting and fighting for the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who are the Indigenous people of Australia. By the way, my addition. If you aren't doing the work to help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, an acknowledgement of country is simply empty words. Acknowledging country can become tokenistic very quickly if their meaning and purpose is not understood and respected, or in this case, even written properly. They aren't simple words to be read and ignored. It's an important custom of our people, this is Georgia May's words, in this modern day, and a symbol of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ongoing culture, community, and contributions. So, taking a step back again, it just seems as if the bare minimum lip service is paid, and inaccurately at that, to issues of race by some of these wellness influencers. They kind of post and say just enough to keep the spiritual capitalist machine well oiled, morally conscious-ish, and rolling ever forwards. So, it's not new news. It's not news that yoga's social media can be highly exclusionary. And the scary thing about the aforementioned post is that not one of this influencer's followers picked up on what I think it was a fairly blatant error, at least to me, and I think it would be fairly obvious to anyone who's listened to an acknowledgement of or a welcome to country. Welcome to country is done by an actual Indigenous person, and acknowledgement of country can be done by anyone. I think it's a pretty obvious error, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so somehow. And that was creepy that no one else picked up on that. I mean, to me, it suggested that the customers of this yoga studio and the followers of this yoga studio are similarly racially homogenous, unaware, and or similarly privileged, which suggests that little to no effort is being made by this studio to make their classes more accessible to BIPOC, despite their alleged solidarity with and respect, in air quotes, I'm saying this, for people of colour. You dive deeper, we look on the website of this yoga studio, there are no scholarships exclusive to Indigenous folks, at least, no sliding scales for classes, and, as you would expect, the website is predominated by thin, white, able-bodied, affluent-looking people. All of this really reveals the expected lack of accessibility to BIPOC. These people are not able to access this studio's classes for all the reasons I just mentioned. And in general, people of colour don't feel welcomed in yoga spaces. Not just this one, but many others like it, of which there are many, and of which I have worked in a number of these spaces. It's not only yoga students of colour, by the way, who are excluded or penalised against in white yoga culture. It's also marginalised folks who are dreaming of becoming yoga teachers, who are already yoga teachers even, or who yearn to be elevated to the social status we see embodied by the most successful, highest earning yoga celebrities, who, of course, are all white, thin, affluent, and able-bodied, by undertaking a yoga teacher training at a famous yoga studio. So, white yoga spaces don't just penalise students who are of colour, but they penalise disadvantaged yoga teachers also. So a way that I see this happening is prospective yoga teachers who are disadvantaged cannot afford the regular full upfront fee for yoga teacher trainings, which is sometimes it's just called the early bird fee, but let's just be honest, it's the regular upfront fee, and you just get penalised if you sign up at the last minute and you have the cash to pay in one lump sum. And the way that they are penalised is by being given the option again air quotes, of payment plans to which a significant additional amount of money is applied, one that exceeds even what is reasonable to cover administration fees for handling such a payment plan. In this case, if you can't afford to pay the full fee up front, you will pay $500 more than if for the yoga teacher training, which all up is $3,500, the early bird full free upfront fee. You'll pay an extra $500 if you need to use a payment plan. And this just further penalises already financially strained folks. It is anything but inclusive. The yoga studio owners and wellness entrepreneurs, this is not just a yoga thing, who take part in these kinds of actions and behaviours, they're not trying to lead the way forward in creating anti-racist yoga spaces. They're not being inclusive. They're not increasing accessibility to disadvantaged folks. They are trying to build personal empires, and that's it. All this stuff has happened on social media. There's lots of examples. I've only honed in on one. And the question some may ask is, okay, but does social media translate to real life? Just because this yoga studio has posted stuff like this, does that really mean that they're actually oppressive? Maybe they're, just misguided. They might be ignorant on issues of race and class due to their own privilege, perhaps. But actively and intentionally oppressive? Surely not. Well, in the name of full disclosure, I actually worked at this studio in question for 3 years. And during this time, I became one of their most popular teachers and was given some of the busier yoga class slots as a result. And I eventually left due to a number of issues that really came down to classism and exploitation of teachers and other karma yoga workers, that was in air quotes in case you didn't hear that, in the name of maximum turnover. In short, it was spiritual capitalism at its finest. At this studio, I witnessed and experienced a significant volume of classist and egregiously capitalist behaviours, including unpaid work in exchange for classes, mislabelled as karma yoga. This happens in other yoga studios as well. Karma yoga means ethical or right action or righteous duty with no attachment or expectation to an outcome. It does not mean after hours cleaning with the expectation of free classes. Mopping floors and cleaning toilets in exchange for classes is not karma yoga. It's just bartering. Work under the guise of karma yoga is exploiting free labour, usually of people who cannot afford the hefty class fees and are willing to work at night when more privileged folks get to relax at home with their families. So again, this is an example of the ways that financially disadvantaged folks are further exploited by white yoga culture. Another issue that I just want to touch on is generally poor treatment of teachers at this studio. Most of the teachers were sole contractors, but treated like employees, but without the benefits of being an employee. There were no contracts, there was no negotiation of benefits. FYI, independent contractors should by definition not be a permanent integral part of a yoga business. And yet almost all the teachers at this studio were independent contractors and put up on the yoga studio's website as if they were permanent employees. Jaisal Parikh and Tejal Patel really eloquently explain this on their podcast, Yoga is Dead. And they put it this way. They say yoga studios don't sell yoga, they sell yoga teachers. So students at this studio that I worked at, students faithfully attended their favourite teachers' classes, with the best teachers placed in charge of teaching the most popular time slots, because those would obviously make the most money. You could say that the teachers were an integral part of this yoga studio staying open. Yet, classes could be taken away from teachers at any time. Payment was on an attendance basis with a very low base rate. So if for any reason, including those reasons outside your control, such as holidays or state of origin football nights when lots of people would just stay home and watch the footy, if that stuff happened, you didn't get many people turn up to your classes and you barely got paid. Even if you'd commuted ages to get to the yoga studio, you'd done back-to-back classes, you'd done a bunch of admin in between and selling merchandise, etc. Sometimes I would get home after 5 hours of work getting paid, I don't know, maybe $40 in total. So less than 10 Australian dollars an hour, which is in American or US dollars, even less than that. Exploiting people who come to yoga because they believe in it and asking them to do stuff for free or paying them just really crappily is not ethical. It's not yogic, but it makes for good business. Barely paying teachers who are running charity or donation-based classes and expecting them to do free marketing, admin, or promotion work, which happened at the studio, is just not ethical. But it's asked of us, and usually with a smile and a sweet lilt to the voice. And of course, an undertone of, if you don't do what I ask, there are 100 other yoga teachers who will. Basically, we were disposable, and because we were independent contractors, we had no employee rights. In fact, we were told that we should be grateful for working there, that it was a privilege, and with the insinuated message that we should turn up for unpaid meetings to be told such things, and to buy our own uniforms and say yes to whatever additional unpaid tasks were asked of us, even though many of the teachers were already living below the poverty line. I know I was at the time, and could not afford to lose their classes, or they were time poor students, or they were young females desperately trying to break out into the yoga wellness sphere and willing to do whatever it took to do so, even if that meant working for really crap pay. And all of this, all the stuff I've mentioned that went on in this studio and undoubtedly many other yoga studios, is oppressive of marginalized people, specifically people further removed from power than the employer or studio owner. And that is a facet of white supremacy. The culture at this studio was shaming and or dismissive of anyone who spoke up, as I did. I was pulled up for not buying and therefore not wearing nor promoting the overpriced slashed and woven yoga tops made by probably underpaid women in Indonesia. Tops that I could easily make myself and did make myself for 1/100th of the price. I was pulled up for not omming at the end of class because, quote, some students don't feel right without it. Spiritual gaslighting and cultural appropriation were rampant. Unfortunately, the studio is far from alone in participating in this kind of behaviour. As I mentioned before, the podcast Yoga is Dead does a great job of highlighting the culture of racism, classism, and cultural appropriation created by white, affluent, able-bodied yoga studio owners and big-time wellness influencers. In an article that I will link to in the show notes, Rachel Rice describes white lady sisterhood as a slurry of cultural appropriation, spiritual bypassing, neoliberalism, multi-level marketing, and random woo punctuated by various signals of authority, virtue, and performative vulnerability from their leaders. She may as well have been describing white yoga studio culture, where the exact same harmful spectacle so often takes place. So, in my experience, when the social media feed of a yoga studio reeks of spiritual capitalism, spiritual bypassing, and feigned activism, it very likely carries over in real life to the studio culture. So now I just want to take a bit of a turn and talk about some of the tactics of defense and dismissal used by some of these yoga and wellness influencers when they are called in or called out on some of this behavior. I mean, the reason I'm recording this episode, despite being really hesitant to call out this yoga studio I used to work at, I mean, I'm not mentioning it in this podcast episode, but if you really want to know who it is, just check out the article that I'm going to put online. I guess I'm just tired. I'm tired of being nice. And I'm tired of not calling influencers in or out for continuing to pretend they care about inclusivity, but who refrain from taking any action to make their spaces and businesses more inclusive. I'm particularly unsettled by the lack of response, which is what I've received so far, or the spiritual bypass laden responses I've received from privately calling these influencers in with DMs or by gently commenting on posts with pretty civil requests to know what they are doing to improve inclusivity in their businesses. Things will not change if these people are allowed to stay comfortable. And they have been comfortable for so effing long. Beyond doing our own work, which is crucial, I think that it is pretty important and reasonable for us to speak up and let these folks know that we want them to decenter themselves, to amplify BIPOC voices and actually walk their talk. Unfortunately, upon being called in or out for their overt exclusivity or challenged on their intentions, many white yoga studio owners and wellness entrepreneurs become defensive, or they shut down the conversation using one or more of the tools that I'm about to describe. So there's three main tools that I've noticed these folks use in order to shut down difficult conversations about whether it's race or white supremacy at large. The first is centering. So this is perhaps the most common tactic used by white wellness women. And that's when, they'll say stuff like, "I'm not racist. It hurts me when people who don't know me attack me and make out that I am racist." This kind of centering happens a lot. So unable to allow people of colour to express their pain at the hurt they have caused, many white female influencers will redirect the conversation to themselves and their feelings. We may not, and I say we as part of this group of wellness influencers, I'm half white, but still, we may not consider ourselves racist, especially if we have not unpacked this stuff in a meaningful and private way. But that doesn't mean that we are not harming others. Again, intention is not the most important thing here. Saying "I'm not racist" shuts down any accountability, introspection, or acknowledgement that we may be complicit in this problem. And it really flies in the face of the niyama of self-study, svadhyaya. So the second tool that these folks may use is tone policing. And that's when people of colour express their pain, sorrow, and anger with the systems and individuals who continue to exclude and dismiss them, but are then told that they should try to be nicer, more mindful, or more evolved if they want to be respected and heard. That's tone policing. And the third and final tool I'll mention is good old spiritual bypassing. So I've mentioned this a few times. It might be a good idea to spell out what it is. So when confronted with the ways we have, through our words or actions, harmed marginalized people, some yoga wellness influencers attempt to love and light it away by regurgitating dog whistle terms like "we are all one" or "I just want peace," and they simultaneously insinuate that those they have harmed are aggressive, divisive, unconscious, or not yet at their own lofty level of consciousness by throwing out phrases like "we're all at different stages of our healing journey," or "we are all going through something," or "not everyone will get me and those aren't my people." All right, so in short, We just cannot effectively address these issues by posting warm, fuzzy, pro-inclusivity memes whilst not addressing the many manifestations of white supremacy within our yoga or wellness businesses. While silence might mean complicity, feigned anti-racism without making any meaningful changes to dismantle white supremacy is possibly worse. It's deceptive, and it sure ain't love and light. Feigned anti-racism, or this performative activism, is especially poignant when your business model arguably hinges on the very same systems of oppression you claim to be opposed to in order to remain successful, as I discuss in that SSSW article, The Sexy, Spiritual, Successful Woman Ideal. If we're quoting "only love is real" and "be kind to all" alongside Black Lives Matter and inclusivity posts, and we're not taking action to dismantle racism nor to elevate the voices of BIPOC on our platforms, we are not walking our talk. So I want to end this on a happy note. There are a growing number of yoga teachers, holistic health practitioners, wellness influencers, and the like who are doing bloody excellent work in allyship, decentering themselves, who are raising the voices of BIPOC, who are doing their own hard work, and or who are speaking out as BIPOC wellness and yoga influencers themselves. I will list these in the online article accompanying this episode, but just to list them, a couple of them now, some of my favorites are at Good Body Feel, at My Name is Jessamine Stanley, and she also is in charge of at the Underbelly Yoga. Of course, at Diane Bondi Yoga Official, Diane Bondi, one of my yoga teachers, whose teacher training I'm undertaking at the moment, and it rocks. There's a bunch more of them. At Rachel Cargill, at Nicole Cardoza, at Skill in Action. Just check them out. Start there if you're ready to do this work and dive in, because it really needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. Loka samasta sukhi no bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. Thank you for being here and for straddling the tricky edges of Yogaland and diet culture with me. I hope this podcast encourages you to compassionately and continuously question the ways that contemporary yoga is unfolding and interacting with other big forces in the world, to develop a discerning mind and open heart, and to skillfully dodge the diet BS that often comes along with studio culture. Like you, I'm eager to keep learning and sharing, and I put all relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, online nutrition counselling services, and lots more at funkyforest.com.au. While you're there, make sure to download my free ebook, A Modern Yogi's BS-free Guide to Wellbeing. It's a light-hearted, easy read with my top 6 tips on dodging diet culture crap in the yoga world, whilst creating sustainable and balanced health from the inside out. If you love the podcast, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/non-dietyogi. There are some pretty rad rewards there, such as exclusive content, discount codes, giveaways, and the ability to chat with me. As more episodes roll out, I'll be adding even more fun bonuses, such as my non-diet yogi cookbook and mini courses. You can access most of the goodies at the lowest level, which is just $2 US a month, or around $2.90 Australian dollars. Like most mamas, I'm ridiculously busy parenting, working, studying, and all the rest. I've recorded a bunch of episodes, and some of these have required 5 separate takes just to get a whole episode done, as I need to wake up before my little ones to do it, and they get up very early. So I'm crossing my fingers that the Patreon will give me the financial capacity to keep doing this. Another way to support is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be so awesome. Thank you. The in and outro song is Evening Glow by John Anderson. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.